welcome back. I really appreciate your all being here. I thought that this was the time for me to tell my story because otherwise, why are we doing this? After a while, it's hard to schedule. People are uncomfortable being in public talking about such things. How is this different from other dialogue groups? There's a risk of it kind of deteriorating into something that's interesting, but no big deal. So I'm going to tell you my story, and I'd love to hear your reactions to it. It's long, but I think it's interesting. The through line is that I'm a shapeshifter. It's my superpower. I have analyzed it, I've fine-tuned it, I've enacted it over the course of my half century in the field, and I know how to do it. I can take a theoretical idea, a model, a constellation, turn it inside out and upside down and turn it into something else. So I can take analytic theory and technique for individual people and flip the script and turn it into something that can be useful on the world stage. You don't have to believe me, but I'm going to tell you how I got here. It goes back to, I started analytic training in 1978. I was 25 years old. And I was, I've said this before, a young Catholic, soon to be pregnant woman in a world full of older Jewish atheist men. And that wasn't discussed. It was not a thing at that time. There was no socio-political, religious, anything. You were just part of the class. And as I was learning about Freud and his model and his history, it sort of, and I was talking to my analyst about it, that the problem that Freud was missing was creativity. He was acting it out. He wasn't analyzing it. He didn't get it. What do women want? I'm sitting there pregnant. His wife is having 6 kids. And he's saying, what do women want? Hello, artists, his classic line, beside the problem of the creative artist, psychoanalysis must, alas, lay down its arms. He didn't get it. Meanwhile, he was getting the Goethe Prize for writing, but he saw himself as a scientist, not an artist. And God is an illusion. God is just something we make up to soothe ourselves. And so I would go to my analyst and I would talk about these things, like how Jesus was an analyst and this and that and the other thing. And I sort of struggled in class because I thought they were too literal, that the Oedipus complex and penis envy, it was a thing. And I was saying he was playing with ideas, playing with unconscious fantasy, playing with, it's not as literal as you guys are making it out to be. But I went to my analyst and, kind of tried to be the good girl in class. At some point, my analyst interpreted, he said, you long to be able to think like other people, even though you might be gifted. Now, I almost quit over that because it sounded like the most hideous countertransference ever. But it just got me thinking that, my brain is weird. But anyway, I did what I was supposed to do, and I was 2 weeks away from terminating my analysis after 7.5 years. This was the days that it was 5 days a week on the couch. And I was pregnant with my second child and almost graduating. And I went into premature labor 2 weeks before the termination date of my analysis. Now, at first, nobody believed me because the obstetrician didn't see it on the monitor. And the analytic world thought, oh, you're terminating in 2 weeks, you're nervous. Meanwhile, I trusted my body and I decided to skip my last 2 weeks and stay home. And I saved my son's life because he was born at 28 weeks rather than 24. And it felt like Sophie's choice. It felt like a choice between my analysis and my baby. It was that intense an experience. So I went back for the last 2 weeks, 3 months later, before he was to be released from the hospital. And I associated to it like one of I used to call them my dead baby dreams. When I started analysis, I would have this flood of dead baby dreams where babies would almost die, but not. and I would find them and save them or something in most different arenas. So here it was, I had just basically enacted one of my dead baby dreams. And it felt like I orchestrated something that brought alive the dynamic of creativity that I'd been talking about. And I wrote a paper about the experience, and I called it Creativity, a Work in Progress, and presented the story as performance art, which was midway between acting out and the primacy of language. I was enacting something and communicating something in this piece of art. But then my analyst was left for Florida 5 minutes after my last session. So I'm there thinking, what just happened? So I wrote this paper. It got published in the Quarterly, and I got an award for a young analyst to present a new theory, and everybody applauded. But nobody seemed to grab hold of the fact that I just changed analytic theory around my imagination. So I'm like, all right, what do I do from here? So I went to see, all right, I'll say his name, Shelley Orgel. He's been this anonymous person for a long time, but he died in 2017 or 18, and he gave me permission to use our story and speak his name, so I will. I went to him because there was something about him that just seemed like I wanted to talk to him. Very rigid. He was the chair of the board on professional standards of the American, the standard bearer. And I went to him and I told him the story. Like, what is this? What's me? What am I seeing that's a problem in the field? What's my idiosyncratic, whatever? And so I told him the story. And during the course of that session, we had just gotten a newsletter from, I don't know, this TAP, the new analytic newsletter. And there was a line from one of his colleagues that said, with the exception of a genius like Freud, the average individual has no more than one original idea in his lifetime, probably none. And I referenced that line. And he tried to reassure me that it wasn't true, that a person could have lots of original ideas without being Freud. And at the end of the session, we left and said we would both think about it and figure out where we go from here. So I went home and I realized that I didn't want that kind of reassurance, that I actually agreed with that line, and that the average individual doesn't have more than a few original ideas, but I was flooded with them. And I had grown up with this fantasy of being a genius that I tried to analyze away as some permutation of some hideous narcissism. But I was starting to think that maybe there was some truth to it. Maybe I actually had the capacity to do something, to create something new. So I wrote him a letter. This was right at the beginning of computers, And so I wrote him a letter and I said this. And I met him in the hallway a few days later, and he said, "You'll have to prove it." And I thought I died and went to heaven. Because it validated the fantasy. It validated the fact that I could think that thought. It didn't matter whether it was true or not. We weren't going to know that until after we were both dead. But just reflecting back what I was saying without the horror you couldn't imagine how liberating it was. So I went back to him and I said, all right, let's try it. I have this idea about a creative permutation of psychoanalysis. How about if we meet 5 days a year and we'll write letters in between and we'll chat and we'll talk about whatever we want to talk about, and we'll be the dynamic will be equal. It'll be an equal playing field, you and me. Basically, I took the analytic model and turned it inside out and invited him to do the exact opposite of everything we were taught to do. And he was fascinated. And he said, okay. So for 10 years, we did that. We met five times a year. And I have about 3,000 pages of theoretical philosophical love letters in my file cabinet. And I asked him what he would charge. He said nothing. He would kiss me goodbye like a daughter and a father at the end of the session. Everything was the opposite of the analytic rule. Every piece of it was just inside out and upside down. Like I say, I'm a shapeshifter. So, and it was marvelous. I came up with all of these fascinating ideas about the way psychoanalysis. I'm not going to try to babble about it, but one of the things that I realized was that we were not going to be able to separate unless we had a war, because the theory led there. And okay, and that happened. We had what I call a war, because toward the end of this process, I wanted to come out of the closet and market it as something we were doing that was a new technique. It was a catalytic technique, a way to bring new ideas into being. And so I wanted to tell people what we were doing. And he did not, because from his perspective, he wanted to remain the neutral, anonymous analyst and didn't want to be known as doing something that looked crazy. Mm-hmm. And so we were stuck. It was basically an ideological difference. I felt like I had no right to exist, and he was refusing me a right to exist. And he felt like I was going to destroy his reputation, which he had built up over his entire career. And so it was a head-on collision. I wound up writing the first chapter of a book where I laid this all out in a way that was, I guess, aesthetically appealing. It's a narrative rather than you're doing this, and it explained what the problem was and what we were doing, what I thought we were doing. And I handed it out to people at my institute who were all fascinated and looking from a distance. And so we met a few more times, but at some point he said, look, I can't do this anymore. Next time is going to be the last meeting. So we met, and it was awful until right at the end when he said something. I forgot what he said. And I responded with, God, you're concrete. And he got really sad. And he said, yeah, you're right, I am. See, I'm a disappointment to you. And at that point, I said, no, wait a minute. No, you're not. That's the right answer. You are concrete in a particular way, and I am abstract in a particular way, and we speak different languages. I've been saying that all along. You and I speak different languages, and so language differences lead to war. I'd had a whole theory about it. And we stopped. We laughed, we cried, we hugged, we said goodbye. It was the most perfect analytic hour. You know, an old-fashioned movie would have, you know, ended that way. And I left, and I left with the absolute confidence that I knew what I was doing, that I was onto something. And for the past 20, 30 years, I designed an emotional literacy curriculum that I taught in 2 schools for 6 years. I co-created 2 mental health documentaries. I wrote a book. I've got these waging dialogue projects. I'm working on developing an app. And so anyway, this is where my confidence comes from. And what I want to do here is something similar to what I said with Shelley, that what we can do is take analytic theory and make it useful on the world stage by doing something again, the opposite of what happens in analysis. It's a model of difference, not pathology, and a model where we can tolerate the discomfort of someone saying, I don't understand you, I don't believe you, I think you're wrong, you scare me, you know, this is threatening to me, this sounds crazy, and explore that space between 2 people, which we can't do now. Right now, people will say something and they will be instantly labeled an ism word of some kind and made to go away. So, and the third dimension is the outside world. anyway, that's basically what I'm trying to do here, and that's the story of where it comes from, and why I'm convinced that there's something here that our field needs to go to another paradigm shift, a paradigm shift that will allow us to have an impact on the socio-political reality, which is it's just coming apart at the seams. Okay, I'm done.
One of the things that strikes me is that, and has all along, I mean, we've been working on this for a while, is that a theory of difference goes a long way to eliminating shame and defensiveness. And that's very important to me, as opposed to a theory of pathology. I've seen that in the nonviolent world, nonviolent resistance world, a way of defining how we're approaching things, so that you're fighting forces of evil, but not other individuals. It's again an effort to eliminate the "you call me a bad name and I don't like it" kind of response.
I don't know how common it is for somebody to have lived in a community where one is shamed and pathologized for being, a liberal in a conservative community, and then also knows what it's like to be a part of a largely liberal community where it's, de rigueur to shame and pathologize conservative people. But I mean, I've lived in both of those realities, and I don't think it's a great thing either way.
One of the many things that struck me, Alice, about your extraordinary story, I mean, sort of putting all the pieces together, is having all that time working with this person over the years, but the kind of crisis of difference didn't seem to expose itself to the very end,
Right.
which is interesting. So, like, what does that mean around kind of positive transference? Obscures that, and I make a parallel to my thoughts about our group to some degree. Our desire and our respect and care for each other in some ways is a way to maintain the relationship. And we fear maybe the difference might emerge. But I think what you modeled is somehow the difference didn't kill it. It transformed something in the end. So could you have found that difference at the very beginning, or like all those questions come up when I hear your story?
Yeah, it's I think writing the letters helped. If we were meeting very frequently, we would have hit dead ends. We would, when we met, sometimes we would argue over something or correct for error when one of us misunderstood something. Other times we would talk about the movies or something that happened at the Institute. We would just chat about anything. But it opened a door, and from there, the letters would happen. And the letters made it easier to tolerate because we just had the space to read and think and not have to react in the moment, because the fight or flight thing kicks in pretty quickly. When you're challenged and then you don't know what to say and you say something stupid, and then but we could be defensive in the room and then go home and say, oops, that didn't feel right. And it's why when I think about what we're doing, I kind of like the idea of meeting, again, 5 times a year seems like a good model with emails in between to, do a little of that, processing.
One thing you said in the email exchange that we had briefly before this meeting today, you mentioned a postulate that you had, which was that people who are really intense and active and so on regarding this public issue, these polarizations that we're experiencing really around the world, that's a different model or a different reason for this level of intensity than an individual. I think you used the example, someone who'd been abused as a child and had a lot of anger, and the issue was to try to contain that anger, that there's a different dynamic going on with the large group anger. And I thought that was really interesting. That was a really interesting point.
Yeah, thanks. I think we do conflate the individual and the large group, and that gets in the way because we argue large group dynamics by saying I'm not like that or he's not like that, and vice versa. It's if I'm Palestinian or Jewish and I'm outraged at what the other side is doing, you can't say it's because I had abusive parents. Maybe I did, but it's a very different dynamic. And there is something about when I enacted it with Shelley, it had to do with just needing to exist. That the feeling of I'd rather kill and be killed than to do all of this and then be told I have to go back into my corner and pretend in order to be acceptable by the community. The feeling of I will drop a bomb in your midst, which I sort of did. It was a piece of art, but it was bomb. But I remember racking my brains trying to figure out how to be true to myself and true to him and true to my community and keep my job and my reputation. That was not easy. But I think that in there are the dynamics of ideological conflicts lead to war in quotation marks. The kind of dismissing and fighting, ridiculing, and
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying about difference, Alice, and difference in the relationship you had with Shelley and kind of the project you were engaged in, and then you mentioned connecting into the sociocultural. And I'm curious how you would think about difference versus tribalism. I think that humans are inherently tribal. I think that's our nature, and to say we aren't, or to try to sort of propagandize people out of it, is a denial of human nature, is a sort of going against human nature, right? And from my perspective, from what I've observed, is that people have been denied, are being denied most avenues, to be tribal. Like it's not okay to be proud to be an American anymore, right? Or to be proud of our history, or even to have some sense of, just an example, for people to be proud that they're, I don't know, Polish American, right? That they've got like this history, this ancestry, and, that they've come here and they've been able to maintain certain customs and certain foods. And it's sort of like all of that is verboten now towards the goal of a sort of globalized liberal subject. And I think as a result, we see these splits. because the only acceptable avenue seems to be to have tribalism in the right versus left divide.
Interesting.
Well, I guess on the question of pride, I mean, is it possible to be ambivalently proud, or, to sort of not be in denial from the all in all, to hold respect and a pride, but also acknowledge that it's not all love and light? I mean, again, I understand this all or nothing stuff is really problematic.
I agree with that. I think there has not been room for nuance at all.
And
Well,
I understand some people feel that pressure that it has to be all or nothing, but I'm not sure that that's where the center of gravity is.
I think it's somewhat, I don't know, galling to be a psychoanalytic candidate where on the one hand, we're followers of Freud and, being able to try to wrap our head around practically anything a human mind can think. And yet, when we transfer it from the individual to society, it all collapses into, well, no, we all think this if you want to be part of our tribe. And I find that, how is that consistent? It's intellectually inconsistent to me, I think.
so Cameron, are you saying that psychoanalysts are just as tribal, or that, we people have to believe certain things in order to fit into the psychoanalytic tribe?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, practically speaking, yes. But I think what makes it more indefensible is that we are the proponents of quite the opposite when it comes to sitting with pretty much any individual with any kind of problem, not to judge, not to blame or other or pathologize, but to help and to communicate, meeting people where they are, with understanding. And it's kind of hypocritical. That might not be the right word. Inconsistent.
Interesting.
Well, I agree with you that that's what I've observed too. Almost like, well, first, I think it's actually pretty rare to have, enough of a degree of openness and kind of, negative capability, right? Being able to tolerate uncertainty and so forth, and to prize nuance. I think that those are pretty rare qualities in humans, period, right? And I think the field psychoanalysis does draw people who have some of those qualities or have them to an extent. So maybe it's there on an individual level, but it's almost like when a group of people get together, to your point, Cameron, it's like, and I guess to my earlier point, it's like they can't help but be tribal.
It's safer to be in a tribe.
Mm.
Samek Bolkin talks about chosen glories and chosen traumas. My people suffered this. My people need that. My people feel that. And you're safer when you're in a group of like-minded people. And I think the internet just makes that infinitely worse because the algorithms will tell us what we want to hear from the people that we want to hear it from. Part of what I hope to do with this project and the app, if we can get funding for the app, is to return to the human with human, one person with another person. If you want to use your pet robot to ask it a question about how I might respond, okay, but it's me talking to you and not me, ridiculing you on Twitter or you know, it's, and to actually be able to listen to another person's center. You know, I think our identities are like our personalities. You can't change them. And, or you can, but you can with, you know, neuroplasticity is a thing, but it takes a long time and motivation and curiosity and defensiveness and going back and forth, you know, the way you would trying to change your own personality traits that are getting in your way. But we need space to do that. And it's not going to happen when you say, I believe this, and somebody else says you're an idiot.
Well, what's happened is because of all of that, I say this and you're an idiot, is people now don't talk to each other. It really has hurt. Not so much the individual work, but I run groups. And I actually said something at the very end. Somebody made some comment. We meet once a month, and I think the next time we were meeting was election day. And one person had to go out and say who she was for, you know, and people, they can't stop themselves. They can't stop themselves for understanding that an election is about taking things apart, thinking about what's important to you. And it's such a personal decision to vote. And there's not a respect for it. And so I actually took a risk at the end and I said, you know, I've noticed that the groups have not been the same. Because, you know, it's like we know we can't talk about politics or religion. That rule is big now. Because there's been so many problems in discussions and so many people terribly hurt. Not that, and what would get to me was like people make all sorts of assumptions about other people, about what they think, and there's so much that's missing. And it really is such a shame because we're poorer for it.
And we've made everything is about politics. It's kind of it's two very contrary things. There's a word for that. It's not coming to mind. But on the one hand, politics is it's so out in front of everything that groups can't have open communications about a lot of things anymore. But like politics is everywhere, but it can't really be talked about without it breaking down. So like it's everywhere in sports and entertainment. Like everyone has an opinion of Taylor Swift and politics, or the NFL and politics, or psychoanalysis and politics. It's kind of everywhere, yet nowhere because it's so toxic we can't actually talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, I find people's politics fascinating because my patients talk to me about them. Never did. 50 years, nobody ever talked about politics. Now everybody does. It's like it's in the room, and it's I find it really interesting to hear how they came to reach their conclusions.
And what is it a proxy for? Maybe it's a proxy for a deeper sense of like minimizing the complexity of their identity or something like that.
Yeah.
And I agree, they're very interesting topics, politics and religion. I mean, they're very fascinating. And I don't understand why it's taken so personally. You know, if you think about an analytic process, you're exchanging views, you're exchanging ideas. And when you go into that voting booth, it's private. And like, you know, you're talking about something with patients, and then the patient decides how they're going to use what is going on in the treatment. So it's, you know, you talk and you open something up. So you have that rich experience, hopefully. And then from that experience, you're in a better position to make a decision, but your decision is your own. It doesn't belong to anybody else, really.
But you also can't compel your patient to do something.
Of course not.
Well, I think that's where maybe the line comes into politics, because it is about power to some degree.
Mm-hmm. See, I was talking from my position as a voter, as if I were the patient. Even though I'm with someone else, I'm much more comfortable because I don't. It's up to them to make the decision. In the end, you have to make your own decisions for all sorts of things. So I'm not sure I exactly followed. What can you say more, Jack?
Well, the implications of your politics have to do with what tribe you belong to and which tribe has more power over the other. And so there's more at stake.
I mean, when you're connected to the party in or not in power.
I mean, we're seeing it right now. I mean,
So interesting. That is exactly what we're seeing.
and the fear that it's going to create a cycle, a recurring cycle of domination and dominance, and it's setting in motion a kind of repetition compulsion that's not going to end well for anybody.
Yeah, and we're really all kind of in the same boat. We're in this world that is deteriorating. Regardless of what side someone is on, if the world goes under, it doesn't matter which side you're on, really.
So I just had this thought: if the country were a patient who came in to see you right now, how would you work with them?
I think, Uncle Sam is having a psychotic break.
I think so.
There's reality testing is moral compass, saying crazy stuff, not knowing. I get articles all the time. I have no idea if they're factual or nonsense.
That's the idea. We're not fed information that we can depend on.
Yeah.
Not reliable.
That's how I feel when I hear a psychotic person talk. My neighbor is sending me messages through the wall. Maybe they are, but I don't think so. But what do you do with that information? But I hear that all the time from the left and the right. That's why I think we need a grassroots movement for people to talk one-on-one and then connect with their groups. And just because it's very hard to be true to yourself and be authentic in the presence of someone else unless they think exactly the way you do.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really, really hard. And the other person will roll their eyes or will say, "Oh, you don't really mean that," or "Really, you think that?" And it's uncomfortable.
There is a certain attacking when people talk about politics. It isn't a discussion. It's like this is not as an analyst, just I was with a bunch of people the other time, and I forget, they were talking about the mayoral election in New York, which was a whole big, they weren't open to hearing something that wasn't part of what their reality was. And there is a sense of, you really feel othered.
Yeah.
You really, you feel like your thoughts don't matter. You don't matter. And so there's a lot of hurt that has happened by what's going on. I think we're all suffering.
Yeah. We don't want to tolerate the discomfort of being hurt and possibly hurting someone else by asking a question or not being entirely supportive. And it's just easier to say, "You do you," and go off with your cohort and ignore it. Don't talk about religion or politics. But then we don't get anywhere.
It gets dead. It gets thin. It gets boring.
One question I've had in my mind and have not ever asked you, Alice, is there a point in your own thinking where you would say the difference model doesn't hold up, and we really do have to go back to a psychopathology model?
It's a good question. I think if we use a difference model, I like to think that the greater truth will rise to the top if people struggle around their differences, that it's not just going to be, your truth and my truth and they're equal, because one truth will be more true than another. That's the way it is in science. People try to prove something, and if your lab proves it and mine doesn't, I'm going to have to lose my grant and, accept your model because it's more accurate. Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that there will be something positive will happen that's more than just accepting otherness, but challenging otherness. I mean, what I did with Shelley was our otherness came into head-on collision, and when we analyzed it, it just a path opened that we didn't see before.
It became less threatening to you both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that we didn't see that before. We had to have, a battle that could be resolved, and then the path was there that neither of us saw before. And I think that can happen in other arenas if we struggle with hard conversations over time. That creative solutions will emerge from that struggle.
I think we are part of the challenge right now is we're at such a unique moment because the technology is so disruptive and unprecedented, like these deep fake AI videos with the mariachi dancers and the sombreros. And I mean, it's just, you can't compare that sort of thing to anything that's ever happened in our lifetimes, I don't think. And then the personality characteristics of the current leader is so unlike any leader we've ever seen before, and idiosyncratic. And I mean, I'm trying to be kind here, and just totally unprecedented and bizarre in many ways. And so what I was thinking was, I mean, the way Alice and I think you were talking about how we're having like a psychotic break in a way, like I guess that that made me a little uncomfortable in a way, because I thought, well, are we then dismissive or invalidating the message of the people who have created this, like the voters? Like he wouldn't be there if it weren't for the voters. So maybe a lot of them actually are thinking, well, yeah, this is what we wanted. And so what are they saying? Like I don't know if their message to us is a psychotic message. It's possible their messenger perhaps is. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say that. Let me not say that. But I mean, certain qualities that are make one wonder. But I wonder if the using that as an instrument to deliver a message was actually a rational decision that a lot of us just don't want to try to even understand. And so we never hear what is even being said by these decisions to vote a certain way.
Yeah, I do hear it. I hear it from a lot of people, including close friends and my Facebook friends and patients. Went to a wedding last week with the nanny who raised my kids for 16 years. They're very MAGA, and they're fun to talk to. I didn't mean to suggest that it was the other side that was the psychotic side. I think the split is part of what's making us not hear each other, not trust each other, not be paranoid in relation to each other, and not trust the facts that the other side gives, not trust the moral compass that the other side gives. And I think it goes both ways.
I think we get lost on the more liberal side in the fact checking that there were 30,000 lies, in the last administration or whatever, all the number, each individual fact. But the other side's maybe seems like they have like a big fact, like one big fact is however they're delivering some message that's I don't know, that we don't even know we haven't even figured out what it is, but it's not based in illusion. There's something to it. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say about that.
Well, I agree. I agree, Cameron. There is a message being delivered. I mean, what is it, 70 million people who voted to deliver a particular message? I read a good book recently. It's called The Return of the Strong Gods by R.R. Reno, Rusty Reno. He's the editor of the magazine First Things, too. And, he made a pretty compelling case that we're seeing. So he sort of traces what he calls the post-war consensus and the open society and kind of the elite project to take down borders and create a sort of borderless, nationless, global open society with free trade and free movement, and every place looks like the other place. It's sort of like one giant airport, right? Where maybe you can go to different stands to get different kinds of food. But the voters, I think ordinary citizens are roundly rejecting that. Not only in the US, you're seeing these movements sweep through Europe. I think normal people are saying, we live in a nation. We want to be proud of our nation. We want to have borders around our nation and be, thoughtful about who we let in, and that the people who come in, they should assimilate to the nation that has let them in, right? So I think the voting, in part, I'm not saying this is the total kind of story, but I think in part it is a reification of nationalism, of identity, again, national patriotic identity. And I think it is a rejection of the sort of free trade, global, you shouldn't be proud of where you live or where you're from. You're sort of just a global citizen. We can manufacture things elsewhere and bring them in. So I think it's a rejection of that, of a sort of open society vision. So Rusty Reno, so just to kind of sum it up, his strong gods that he references are basically religion and nationalism. Those are kind of the two themes. And sort of the idea was that the post-war consensus, the open society kind of project, attempted to, I guess, take God and nationalism away from the people, if you will. I know that's a pretty simple and reductive way of putting it, but um, and the people have sort of said no, they don't care if they're called deplorable, but they want their God and their nationalism.
But again, I feel this is all very reasonable. I mean, I totally get, why someone would feel that way. But I think that there's a way in which, again, modeling this is extreme, like people's fear of engulfment, as if having a bit of a permeable border is going to end up in total engulfment, or that there's a way in which it's very hard to hold something in the center. And it's a much more nuanced, difficult position to sort of support and manage. And so it feels like we cycle into these too much openness, too much fluidity, too much concentration on traditional stuff and religions, and then we go to the other extremes, and neither of those feels like it's sustainable. So, I mean, I think, I think Jews wrestle with how to be proud of Israel at the same time of dealing with what's happening there,
Yeah.
we talk about, I mean, the people I know in Israel are really struggling this question, and Katrina, of how to be proud of the country. And, the US is not Israel. We've got a little bit of shadow in our past, but again, it's like, what does it look like to be patriotic and to be nationalist, but also understand the complexity of history? And
Mhm.
like you say, to be able to say it in the uncertainty and into a negative state means being able to hold the complexity of a complete identity.
But most people aren't like that, Jack.
I know. So they get people are then manipulated by politicians to go one way or the other and to make it impossible to have a dialogue in the middle. It's a way to get power to make things simple, that it's us or them. And whichever side you are, there's an us and a them, and that's what power is based on.
But they're all trouble. The whole thing is a mess. It's
Right, I'm not saying one or the other, right?
but the problem is that if we would forget one or the other, and I'm not going to save the world either. But on a second, phone just okay. The problem is it doesn't help. Like it's just like a power struggle back and forth, and there's no room for every. I mean, we're all in trouble, and I've said this from the election, and I've been quite alone in that. I said the patient is the country. I said that right after the election, and if we see it that way, because these sides are, I think it's a way not to deal with any of the complexity.
What if, I mean, what if we could hold in our head at the same time, like that ICE should not anonymously pick up random people with brown skin off the street and not give them due process, and not, and send them to third countries where who knows what's going to happen. We shouldn't do that. And saying that an immigrant who arrived to this country 5 years ago is just as much an American as someone whose family's been here for centuries. Well, that's also maybe that's not true either. That someone who's arrived here 5 years ago maybe isn't as much an American, and maybe isn't do, every benefit of being American the way that there is such a thing as an American. Like, I think perhaps one of the reasons conservatives are so upset might be that they keep being told, well, there isn't even such a thing as American. I mean, what is an American? We're just immigrants. We aren't. It's like we don't even exist. Like, uh, what is American anyway? Kind of immigrants are American. You're all immigrants, but that makes people undo their whole like personal identity. That's a big ask.
Mhm.
And you see how it backfires too.
It seems to me that well-intentioned people who are capable of seeing out of two eyes at the same time,
Yeah.
and can, sit in a room together over a period of time and hash this out, will be able to come up with a political position that makes sense, that allows us to keep our boundaries and not let the hordes come in and take our health insurance and our money and our whatever they're afraid. But also where we don't have to build, walls against everyone who wants to come in. There's something in between. We can build those structures. We can do it in math and science, and you can do all sorts of thought experiments and figure out how to solve a problem. But somehow in the human arenas, we seem incapable of doing that. It doesn't sound like that's a problem that should be that hard to solve. Let people who come in to do it right and
Well, I think maybe Jack might have been saying like, the politicians get their power by dividing us and
Yeah.
you know,
And social media gets their power and their money by dividing us as well.
they're manipulating us.
Yes.
That's right.
So we're engaged in a social experiment without consent.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Didn't sign the consent form.
No, we didn't ask to be part of this. None of us did.
Well, I agree. I agree with this line of reasoning. I think a lot of this is downstream of technology. The printing press led directly to the Reformation and the religious wars. And we've got our own currently waging religious wars as a consequence of the digital revolution.
True.
So Alice, is your theory of difference, it seems like it's very much focused on large groups rather than one-on-one, but
No, individuals, I think, have to begin because large groups will band together and will be polarized. I think it's harder to be a liberal in the presence of a conservative and have a hard conversation. But I think more people need to do that. I'd love to start a grassroots movement excuse me, where people are willing to reach across divides and have these conversations. That's why we're trying to develop this app if we can ever get funding for it. It would do that. Matt's designing it as we speak. Where the model that we have, that we imagine now, is one person gives you a 1 or 2 minute sort of presentation of who they are and what they believe, and they're matched with someone who comes from a different religious or political perspective, and they film another video in response, and they go back and forth with videos, and if it works, if they click, then they will meet in person and move into larger groups. And the goal being to understand themselves and others in new ways and try to solve problems, like a place where the cream can rise to the top, people who are good at it.
Mhm.
And
People don't know how to open a difficult, I think they're so anxious that they're going to have a difficult discussion that they say the worst possible thing that doesn't allow for a conversation or an invitation to hear what someone else may want to say. I think there's a lot of, I know that I'm anxious in mixed company.
I was terrified
Yeah.
about this today.
I mean, I think one of the challenges is the transition between dyad and differently sized groups. Like this size of a group can contain a certain amount of diversity, but as you get larger and larger, then the whole dynamic changes. The unconscious becomes much more powerful in terms of governing people's position. And I think that's where we get into trouble, because managing and understanding a large group is so much more difficult.
Mhm.
yeah, true.
I think if we can allow good leaders to rise to the top, if we can set up some kind of a dynamic where they would be recognized and allowed to emerge, and the struggle would be appropriate,
Mhm.
that they're out there. The best rise to the top in other arenas. I get on a
But
plane.
in politics.
Politics, yeah. Yeah, if I get on a plane, I trust that everybody who designed and built and flying it knows rocket science. But when I listen to political leaders talk, they don't know shit.
No, we have no container.
No. Yeah, I would like our field to transition from, it started out as a one-person model and then it moved to a two-person relational model. I want it to transition to a three-dimensional model with the outside world as part of it. And I call it a three-dimensional model of difference, where our yes, our childhood experiences, but also our culture's chosen glories and chosen traumas and histories and symbols that come from our people, you know, wanting to protect our people and having a hard time understanding other people. It always bothered me that people would say, you know, don't be prejudiced, but I couldn't talk to people from a different culture because I didn't understand them.
Exactly.
And if I tried to ask a stupid question, I would sound prejudiced. And if I tried to say, you're just like me, that sounds stupid too.
Mhm.
And so where do you go? You walk away. And
Mhm.
I don't know.
And we all have bias and prejudice. It's like part of being human. Like it's not murder. It's, you know, it's part of, you know, we have all ugly things in us and beautiful things. We're a composite of many different aspects.
Absolutely.
It makes life interesting. I mean, if you get not to just swallow in the bad, but to kind of work through it and gain some understanding, like you were saying, Alice, you can't understand somebody from a very different culture without asking a question of interest, but you never know how that interest is going to be received.
Right.
And so, because of our anxiety, we're not at our best when we're talking to other people.
That's right. But it's possible. We have the tools. You know, everything that we do in the individual arena, we can shift to the socio-political arena and just have these conversations.
And there are a couple of people who are doing podcasts who are trying to bring two sides together. I've seen a little bit of that, and that's hopeful.
But the Ezra Klein Ta-Nehisi Coates podcast
That's what
was
I was
very
thinking.
interesting, and the reactions to it have also been very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was, to me, that was just a clinic and, you know, how to talk to each other
But a lot
about
of the
difficult
comments
things.
were a lot of the comments are just basically saying Ezra Klein is completely terrible now.
Yeah, I
You know,
heard about that. I didn't listen.
and
I listened to part of it, so I didn't hear the whole thing. But,
I read the transcript, so I didn't, yeah.
it's the Greek chorus that's the problem. You know, if you want to talk about something, and you know, I guess Ezra Klein has a thick enough skin to survive this, but there's no room for this was an opportunity to understand difference. I didn't hear the whole thing, so I can't really comment on it. But I heard it. I heard, you know, in the beginning, I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. But then at the beginning, there was stuff that, you know, was uncomfortable for me to hear. I didn't hear the whole thing.
it was good. I mean, they had very different perspectives, but they were very considerate and thoughtful with each other, I thought.
Mhm.
And their differences weren't resolved, but it was all
Yeah,
right.
you're allowed to have differences. I mean, it makes the world more interesting
Yeah.
to be able to have different points of view.
Well, one of the things that you talk about, Alice, a whole lot is we can either have these ability to talk with each other, or we can just fall into our fight or flight kind of way of coping. But what happens often when we do get into those conversations is that the fight or flight thing kicks in anyhow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. We have to be aware. I mean, neuroplasticity is a thing that's emerged in the last decade of my career, where, you know, we can change our brain pathways, but only with a lot of effort and insight and, you know, motivation. But yeah, the fight or flight, we're programmed for fight, flight, or freeze in the face of threats. And I think otherness is a threat.
I think so.
It's, yeah, the only way it's not threatening is if we can roll our eyes and dismiss them.
Right.
But they're just as human as we are.
Exactly.
It's
You know what I've also noticed when people are trying to like slam down their point of view at me all the time, they'll be doing something really nice for me. Like somebody I don't know, somebody called me and then she had to go right in on and she knows that I don't agree with her. I don't even discuss it. But it's like a primal need to have to every time add this to the discussion when the person was actually doing something really nice for me. So it's like good people. We're basically good people, but I think we forget.
You mentioned that in our last conversation, probably the same incident
Which one?
about someone had done something nice, called to see how you were, whatever.
Another person, that person.
Yeah.
And there was another person who was.
Oh, that was different. Okay.
There was another person did another. It was like a whole crowd of people who were.
A lot of people are trying to change you.
But I don't even say anything. I don't go near the subject. It's like it can feel lonely when you're the one with a differing opinion, and there's not much room or a feeling of desire on the other person to understand you.
Mhm.
So, instead of it being an opportunity to learn, it becomes you kind of go retreat into your shell for protection. It is fight or flight.
Yeah.
But these are reasonable people. They're not bad people. They're very otherwise reasonable. Who I guess everybody is very upset right now. And most people have not very limited containment. We have a media that we can't trust. And so, it is a paranoid schizoid position all over the place.
Well, but I mean, I think I've said some version of this before, but I come back to that there's no shared metaphysics. And I was thinking about an incident here with a neighbor of mine who's been very nice. I mean, to your point, Michelle, she's been very nice to me. She's been very helpful to me. And then she was also telling me about some of her political work out here, some canvassing. And I guess she had found out that a neighbor who's not far from me was a Trump supporter or Trump voter. So she, like during a walk, I guess they were both walking their dogs or something like that. She confronted him about this, which I just cannot imagine doing. It does not matter what political sign a person has in their yard. I'm not going to confront them, right? But she confronted this man and basically said to him, well, what about a woman's right to choose? And something about that has just really stayed with me because, I think that there's a fundamental disagreement about life. When does life begin, right? To her, he must be just this horrible person who is infringing on woman's right to choose, right? But I imagine to him, she espouses a murderous position that a human life is a human life, no, if in the womb or outside the womb, right? And this is just the quick anecdote. I don't know that there was more to this discussion or how it all played out, but I think it has stayed with me because I think if we don't have a consensus on these big issues, of course, people are going to fight about little stuff. I mean, big stuff too, but there's there's just no shared philosophy, shared metaphysics, shared understanding of life.
Well, so follow that onward. If we were to have that conversation, and we were going to have that conversation at one point, is that an all or nothing proposition, or could we be in a different position where you believe life starts at a certain point and someone else believes that it's not? Can we hold both of those things at the same time around something so fundamental? How do you feel? In other words, the person who feels that life begins at conception and the person who believes that it begins some other place where doctors may say something.
Mhm.
How do those two people reconcile something that feels so radically different in terms of morality or, what you're describing?
I think it's an excellent question. I mean, that seems to be the $1 million question. I mean, I think civil wars have been started for less, wars among, between countries have been started for less. I think it's so fundamental that I don't know that it's really, I don't think you can compromise on something like that. I don't know. That's my kind of off the
That's the
cuff.
question. Yeah, I mean, some people can, if there's something that can't be compromised, how does one hold that difference?
Yeah.
I actually had, I think it's probably in some of my letters to Shelley, although this has been going on for so many years, I don't know where it is. But the way I reconcile it is that human beings, our tragic flaw is that we kill our own kind at the drop of a hat. And we do it in so many different ways. And abortion is just one of the ways that we take each other's lives. And when I think of it that way, it sort of unifies the conservative perspective, yes, it is life, and the liberal perspective of, if I'm going to kill the people in Gaza and Israel and the poor people down the street and the people in the jails and we're shooting each other, what kind of militaries do we have? Why not this is the way women do it. If women want to do it, let them do it, until we figure that out, that we are creatures that kill our own kind. Anyway, that's the meta psychology that I use to reconcile the two.
Well, I'm thinking about your dead baby dreams, which
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a whole thing in there as well. There's also, you talk about metaphysics and language. Another piece of this, when I was left with my my 4 supervisors who gave me very, very different responses to what had happened. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. And then I had an insight. It was in the shower. It felt like a Helen Keller moment, where I realized when I was 6 months old, my mother was hospitalized for a month with acute pancreatitis that was misdiagnosed as gallbladder, and she almost died, and then she didn't. But I was left with her mother and her 3 sisters. So there's mother, quotation mark mother, and what the fuck is a mother? So, when mother comes home and everybody says, mommy's there, I picture a little baby saying, where'd mommy go? And what are these people? When my analyst left and I was left with these 4 supervisors, it resonated with that. Obviously I didn't have a memory of it, but I recreated it. And I think that's where my brain is, neuroplasticity is neurodivergent in some kind of way. Because if you give me an idea, I will put quotation marks around it and I will ask questions about it. Abortion is a literal thing. Abortion is removal of a life. Abortion is evidence of this thing that human beings get stuck in. I can, when I say shapeshift, I do that easily. And I think it comes from there. I think it comes from my language paradigm as just, yeah, the way I frame reality is a little bit weird.
You're very comfortable with metaphor.
Yeah, I can, I play with language all the time. But it's just another piece of my strange brain.
Doesn't everybody have a strange brain though?
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
We
Yeah.
do. It's fun to get to know someone's strange brain. And it tells us a lot.
because everybody is an individual.
Can you be a psychoanalyst if you don't have a strange brain?
Good question.
So true.
But I don't know, where do we go from here? I want to take this and move it somewhere. Make more of them, or if we're going to share it with APSA, to say something about what we're doing that goes beyond just 6 people talking. What do you think?
You've already pretty much stuck your neck out into APSA territory a number of times, and it hasn't exactly got a groundswell. So and you know, even the parallel, what the dynamics of APSA are,
Mhm.
didn't seem to have got their attention to say, oh, wait a second, maybe we're missing something. So I don't know. The work I do, it's always like build it and maybe they'll come, and probably they won't come, you know, so.
But yeah, that's sort of what I'm doing. I'm building it, and I'm challenging them with, yeah, look here, look at something different. And yeah, they will be deer in headlights, because that's what people do, and that's certainly what APSA does.
They're very afraid of anything that's out of their.
Yeah. Yeah. But the good part about being in my 70s is I stopped caring.
Well, that's what I feel also about being old. Makes it easier.
You don't have to take a risk, but the young folks here, they're the ones who are at risk, just like your analyst doesn't, your relationship over the years, he doesn't want his reputation to go down by connecting to you.
Exactly. No, I completely respect that. I'm you know, it went from being a blank screen to a full screen.
You know, we're at such a change. It's like the Industrial Revolution was one, the digital revolution was one, and we're at another thing, and we're not prepared on how to deal with it. Yeah. So how can I guess the question is, how can psychoanalysis help with this? It's a Teutonic, change. And AI is frightening. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with that?
I want, human with human. The app that I'm imagining, it has that quality of a return to the human, 2 people talking with each other, and
desperately need it.
It's desperately needed. And I'm hoping that it when it emerges, it'll be surprising, because we're moving so far away from that. People are, becoming best friends with their AI companions. And so to become friends with someone who likes Trump, or who, supports Israel or Palestine, I don't know, or whatever, that, and to have those conversations, I think it's a new adventure. It's a new territory to invite people to do that.
Mhm.
They talk about mental health problems all the time, but it's like, I'll help you if you're crazy, but not if you're different. And we have weird brains and weird upbringings and weird cultures, and let's get to know each other. I think our field can be on the ground floor of that, because we also have the tools to understand when something gets in the way.
Mhm.
That we can help, or psychoanalytic robots can help, when we get stuck. But I do think that we can do more than we're doing.
And we need to do more than we're doing, because we're in bad shape. I mean, I'm not just talking about us, I'm the
field, or the world. Yeah.
And people are in despair.
Yeah.
Fear, despair, uncertainty.
I mean, APSA talks a lot about turning to the social, and isn't this part of that? I mean, they prioritize. I think it ought to be. I mean, they prioritize turn to the social. The IPA also.
I thought back, I heard they're saying we really need to focus on psychoanalysis and not. Remember, there was a statement from, was it APSA or the IPA, about their legal issues, the idea of including the politic in psychoanalysis. There was something written, I can't tell you verbatim, but I think they're very concerned about that. And it's going to be, again, you don't want to close off all discussion either. Once you close off a flow, that you can't talk about anything. And I find these groups are just being a member of this group is very, very healing and affirming. And so, just from a participant experience, it's really helpful. And I wish more people would avail themselves of this kind of forum, because I find the most interesting groups are with people of different political persuasions. And it's just interesting. You have to be much more thoughtful. You're not in an echo chamber.
Mhm.
And it becomes a conversation. Because we do need both points of view. Or multi points of view. Because it's a huge country, just geographically, and how many different kinds of people are here. And, I think that, there's so many people now that we can't adequately provide for what we need.
One of the movements that seems to be proliferating a lot is death cafes. And I don't know if you've heard anything about this, that it's a movement, a kind of local movement of people talking about death. And it's interesting because those are politically very diverse. And the common theme is death, dying, something in your family. And there's also something symbolic about that too, in terms
Really?
of people's fascination with death right now.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, actually, I've heard about that.
Heard of it, yeah. Wow.
But at least it's something we all have in common. We're all going there.
Right.
Yeah.
And it could be a place where people realize there's something in common beyond whatever their politics are.
Well, also death is what makes life have such meaning.
And the Freud's death instinct was like the one thing that analysts could never all kind of get on board with, even though he was so adamant that that was a huge part of his theoretical framework. But it didn't catch on the way his other big ideas did.
Right.
There's so much resistance to it. You can't take your politics with you when you go, like money, like it.
That's a good one. That should be or
Yeah.
instead of make American great again. You can't take your politics with you.
I like that.
We have to learn to laugh together. All these other things. People can't enjoy being with people so easily.
And we can solve political problems. We're smart. Our species is brilliant, but we seem unable to solve the simplest political problem because we don't try. We're kids in a playground throwing insults at each other. I don't know if that's a death instinct, but it's something that fight, flight is what we do when we're threatened by otherness, and we can't seem to see it enough to find a way to get past it. Yes, otherness is threatening. If I have to solve a problem with a colleague who thinks very differently, I'm going to be really uncomfortable. So we're not allowed to be uncomfortable these days.
I spent a good part of the summer reading this one book, that Democracy Unchained, and it offered a theory that made a lot of sense to me about economics in the US and political parties in the US, and it's written by a historian. And it sort of took over the theory part of my mind for a while, like all summer. And I realized that made me less able to hear what other people were saying, because I was really hot for my theory.
Mm-hmm.
well, it wasn't my theory, it was the historian's theory, but I took it up, you know.
Mhm.
I think we need to try things on for size. We tend to, what was it that Einstein said, that the intelligentsia lives life behind the printed page?
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
Wow, no, I never heard that. Yeah.
yeah. I wrote something on the apps list of last week about the Freud-Einstein letters of why war, and Einstein challenged Freud with something about he thought the intelligentsia was most apt to lead to these disastrous collective suggestions because the intellectual doesn't have experience of life in the raw, just behind the printed page. And Freud denied, he didn't hear that. He talked about the solution being reason, and he said something like, pacifists we are since our organic nature wills us thus to be, which is the opposite of what
Yeah.
Einstein was saying.
Right.
And so, but nobody caught that. And I think Einstein's right that we intelligentsia, the leftists, you know, the smart ones, the college educated ones, we're floundering. We're making arguments, we're referencing things and nobody's hearing. And there's something that the other side is doing that's just acting and making it happen because they're doing it. And we're saying we shouldn't do that, it's bad, but they're doing it. And somewhere in there's a, I don't know, there's so many questions.
And there's so much we don't know about, like, economics, you know. I mean, I'm just starting, I realize, who am I to know, you know, so much of the complexities of running a country today. You know, you do, and we have an unreliable media, and so we're really flying blind.
I don't know, I'm gonna keep trying to put people in rooms together to see what happens, because I want to make change happen. Not just talk about what should be happening, but actually do the experiments and see if this can get somewhere.
I was thinking, you know, we don't usually really bring out an extremely controversial thing where we all might have very strong different opinions, especially, you know, there's 5 or 10 issues we could all think of that we would all be afraid to talk about. And uh, what would that look like if we really
Yeah.
went into it? Like the things that are so scary to talk about, that, you know, getting canceled or getting ostracized, shamed, uh, what would that be like? Is that, I mean, in order to get enough interest and attention, does one have to actually wade into the deep water of the things everyone's afraid to talk about?
We were going to talk about Charlie Kirk, but that seemed a little too charged.
I would have been willing to, although, you know, I would have been willing to try to do that.
Would you be?
The other issue that occurred to me, you know, some of the like trans things that like Gavin Newsom has said that now, or, you know, having to do with opinions about certain transgender issues, or, you know, like those are frightening things to.
And they need to be talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, to really help transgender people, we got to work together.
Yeah. So do you want to then just email about a topic that we could all tolerate that's a little bit
Well, the topics change, and we meet 5 times a year, and everything changes so dramatically from one meeting to the next that it's really hard to predict.
Sure. That's why I say if we email in between, see what
Mhm.
happens over the course of the next month or two. And
Mhm.
I
come
mean,
up with
current
some-
events change, but I think that there are kind of these underlying philosophical and metaphysical questions, you know, like the question of life that I brought up earlier, you know, even the question of what is a woman. People
Mhm.
don't seem to agree on what the definition of woman is.
Well, let's see what we think. I'm certainly willing to go to any of those places, but that's me. You all have to sort of be on board with a discussion like that. So let's
Mhm.
We
see
can
where.
make a list and then vote on what's the most radioactive topic. that we're
Oh,
all-
really?
Yeah,
Then pick that one, and then pick that one.
Okay.
Radioactive. I like that.
All right. Anything else, or we done for now?
I feel like we're kind of, thanks to you and what you did today, Alice, we're kind of focusing more in on what it is you're concerned about and thinking about and wanting to do. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I just hope it gave you a little more grounding in like who I am and what I think I'm doing. You know. I mean, I must represent some kind of oddball identity. I'm doing weird stuff, you know, an analyst on
Yeah,
TikTok.
I always loved reading what you wrote. And I always felt sorry for you when these people were attacking you. So, but I'm here. We're all here, so we're.
It's the analytic variant of transgender. All right, let's stay in touch by email and go from here. Thank you so much.
Thank
It's great.
Bye, everybody.